I want to say first that my children are here. They're 26 and 31, and for some reason, I still expected them to get up and walk out when we were singing. Wonderful memories. First, I want to thank RJ for all of your help this week and to Christina for the invitation to speak to you all. I've never delivered a sermon, so bear with me. I don't even really see myself as a good advice giver, but we'll see how this goes today. What I want to speak with you about is this idea of coming full circle, both in our spiritual journeys and in our larger lives. I've thought about this recently as my own life seems to be moving in a circular fashion. Despite ups and downs and even U-turns, I feel that through discovery and through growth, I'm kind of back where I started from. The Unitarian Church is not where I grew up, though it is a place where I found a spiritual home at a time when I needed it most in my life. And I've certainly had a circuitous path to my spiritual home. As a child, I attended a small Baptist church in my Detroit neighborhood. My parents did not. Instead, they dropped me and my sister off at Sunday school each week and then returned home, probably thankful for an hour alone. They had become disaffected with the evangelical church of their Southern youth, but they felt it important to have help instilling that moral compass when raising their children. My friends were mostly Polish and Italian Catholics, and they went to Mass with their parents every Saturday. It struck me as odd, but we were already different being Baptist, so I never really discussed it. I distinctly remember attending my grandfather's evangelical Christian church in Tennessee. We traveled there every summer, my parents reuniting with their families after they had moved north looking for auto industry jobs. On one of those trips, my grandfather suggested I go with him to church. While there, he walked me to the pulpit and told the preacher I had accepted Christ into my life and I wanted to be baptized. So while the congregation sang, the preacher dipped his hand into water and he anointed me as saved. It didn't seem strict or overbearing at the time. In fact, everyone seemed so happy, so relieved of their worries and burdens. They all smiled so much. On the way back to our pew, my grandfather whispered that now he could die happy, knowing at least his granddaughter was going to heaven. And indeed, just 5 years later, he walked up that same aisle to deliver a sermon on Thanksgiving morning. He had a massive heart attack and died, 91, in church and happy. Since childhood, I wanted to be a writer and a journalist. Writing was my first love, music my second. As a teen, concerts became my religious experience, and I developed a deep love for pop music. I applied to journalism schools after high school, but I struggled to get access to the stories I needed. I was shy and geeky. I interned for a couple months at a music magazine in Detroit, and I was told by the editor that I'd never be a good music critic because I was too much of a fan. Having met my future husband at the same time as I received this devastating blow, I decided instead to put my writing skills to use in advertising and public relations, something more compatible with being a wife and a mother. I got a 9-to-5 job and I thought I was happy, though something always nagged at me. I just didn't know what. When I met my husband, Kevin, he told me stories of nuns with rulers who turned him off of all religion forever. Though I'd never really practiced my faith as an adult, I never considered myself an atheist as he did. Perhaps agnostic, or as much of the world today, I came to consider myself spiritual, but not religious. I did then and still do have a belief in something higher and something bigger. Due in part to his upbringing and his family's closeness to their Catholic parish, we were married in the Catholic Church. Soon after, we moved to a small town of Dexter, Michigan, to rehab an abandoned farmhouse, and I attended the Catholic Church there. The church itself was beautiful and old, and I came to feel a closeness to the community, the rituals of the services, and the commitment I had to make to a belief. I went through the process of being baptized again. Maybe this is what was missing in my life, I thought. Kind of like that pea that the princess sleeps on under all of those mattresses. This feeling that something was absent continued to keep me up at night. What was it and why? When I had so much, how could I possibly feel my life was lacking? I had a loving, smart, supportive husband, a son, and then a daughter, both beautiful and healthy. We lived in a nice home that we had renovated ourselves. We had good jobs. We had wonderful friendships, a supportive, extended family that we mostly got along with. We were fortunate. How could I feel that something was needing? Why did I spend so much time feeling as though I was looking off at that road not taken? Maybe it was a road to writing, interviewing, hanging out with rock stars, living in a small, cool apartment in LA or New York, being single, making money, gaining recognition for my work. Had I lost that? Had I given it up? Had I turned my back on it? Did I ever measure up to achieving it in the first place? Or did I lack ability and courage? Like many women, I believe, I wondered, would 17-year-old me hate 30-year-old me? I felt lost, and then I felt guilty for feeling lost. So I kept those feelings inside, or at least I thought I did. I had hoped the church would fill that void, but it didn't. And neither did Martha Stewart, or gardening, or running, or making everything in my house by hand. In 2006, I convinced Kevin to attend the Unitarian Universalist Church in Ann Arbor. It's different, I told him. They'll offer you things to think about, not tell you what to think. Our close friends attended, and they understood when I said that I, like my parents before me, was looking for that village that is needed to raise children with a strong compass. I wanted our kids to understand the interconnectedness of all humanity. I wanted them to learn from a caring community and from experiences and people who weren't like us. We are forever grateful that we attended. The UU Church became our spiritual home and our extended family. Shortly after, around the time of our 20th anniversary, I finally had my epiphany. I understood that writing was what was missing in my life. My mother asked me to write about my grandmother, who had raised 3 children as a single parent during the Depression in rural Tennessee, and she was blind. A writer friend suggested that if I wrote a few chapters and a book proposal, she would show it to her agent, a nice woman who might offer me some feedback and pointers. I did that, and the agent called me the next day offering to represent my book. That doesn't happen very often in publishing. I joined a writing group, and for several months, though I greatly enjoyed and was finally happy spending time writing, I struggled to get the story down. I didn't know about dialogue and structure. I told Kevin that I needed to go back to school to get my MFA and become a real writer. He was surprisingly supportive. He had always been supportive of my career and my work, but what I was asking was a lot for our already overextended family to take on. I thought he would suggest that I wait for him to get a few more promotions himself so that he would have the time to pick up the slack while I was studying, but he didn't. Go get that degree now, he told me. I had 2 of the 5 semesters completed when Kevin was diagnosed with head and neck cancer. We became even more grateful for the UU Church as they provided us then with a loving community that helped us in so many ways. We put my degree and everything else on hold while we fought that disease. We thought we'd beaten it after the first round, but then it came back again, and then again. If anyone ever needs a lesson in how to get over feeling that your full life is lacking, I will tell you that going through a partner's long, painful march toward death without being able to stop it is a pretty sure way of doing that. I questioned then how I could ever have thought about needing or wanting something different. I made every bargain with the universe and every deity in it to please just let him live. There was no way then that writing or music or any interview with any rock star could equal or make up for the loss we were facing. I knew inside that it wasn't a trade, yet it was very difficult for me to reconcile the person I had been for so long. Though our UU family held us during that time, I also returned to the rituals of Catholicism, praying the rosary every day in every hospital chapel where Kevin received treatment, in search of comfort, for hope, and yes, for forgiveness. Several times I did this while our UU minister, Reverend Nancy Schaefer, sat with me. An enduring memory is of sitting in the chapel at the University of Chicago Hospital at 2 p.m. after dropping Kevin off for his radiation appointment. I would join 3 Muslim doctors who spread their prayer rugs at the front of the chapel, and we chanted together. Additionally, we were comforted by many other forms of belief. From a coworker in India, Kevin received a statue of Lord Ganesh, which he carried with him everywhere. From another friend, we received a carved Buddha. From another, we received a rosary and special prayer cards. My cousins, who are full habit-wearing Dominican sisters, regularly prayed with and over Kevin, blessing him with holy water they brought from Lourdes. Friends and family members lit candles in far-off churches, put a note in the Western Wall, and included Kevin in international prayer circles. We welcomed all of it and never turned away from those embraces. After 2 years of fighting, Kevin died on September 7th, 2010. His obituary was filled with his participation in our UU church, from founding the men's group, participating in the 7th Circle of Men, and his favorite, being a YRUU advisor. Kevin and I rarely talked about what I would do after. He had a very hard time accepting his diagnosis, so we never had any of those talks. But he made me promise I would return to school and complete my degree, which I did. One of the hardest things I had to do was return to church, the place where Kevin had found such guidance and community, but we did that too. And I meditated and I continued daily prayer. It all kept me going without him. Within 5 years, I lost Kevin, along with both my parents, Reverend Nancy Schaefer, and 3 very close friends. I sold the house we renovated, and I watched as my children went off to college and to live their lives. I was no longer looking over at that path not taken. Instead, I looked at the path I thought I would live forever, and I saw nothing. No clear way forward. My identity, gone. Yet if I didn't know that writing needed to be in my life as a young wife, I most certainly did know that it needed to be in my life when I became a young widow 26 years later. I knew that writing would somehow see me through. 2 years after Kevin died, just as I was completing my degree, I heard a radio story about Yoko Ono. I read about her then and investigated all she had done. She became a touchstone for me as I looked for women who had moved on after unspeakable loss. And along with Yoko, I found other widows of rock stars who had done amazing things. It came to me that finding these women and writing their stories would see me through to a new life and be my path forward. Their stories deserve to be told. And indeed, I have. I've traveled around the US and overseas, tracking down these wonderful women, spending time with them, hearing their stories. I've told each of them about Kevin, and we have found so many similarities in our lives and our grief journeys. They have taught me so much. From Crystal Zevon, widow of singer-songwriter Warren Zevon, I learned about forgiveness. Warren had been physically abusive, and after getting a stage 4 diagnosis, he had asked Crystal to write his biography after he died. Though they hadn't lived together for several years, she agreed, using journals that he left to her. The journals contained details of his extramarital affairs and many of his transgressions. Crystal told me, reading those journals was like Warren punching me in the face all over again. But then I realized they were also his last confession, his last request to me for absolution. And so there was nothing left to do but forgive him, as much for me as for him. And now I just love him and miss him. From Ingrid Croce, widow of Jim Croce, I learned about honoring one's legacy. Ingrid was just 27 and a new mother when Jim died in a plane crash. He was such a good man, she said, and he had worked so hard to achieve what he'd finally realized, only to then be taken. Our life together, which was just starting, was then erased. But I can make sure that Jim is remembered. As long as I am here, I will make certain that Jim and his music are never forgotten. From Haley Sage, widow of world musician Bob Brosman, I learned about redemption. I know Bob carried darkness with him his whole life, she said. I know he was in pain. I won't be ashamed of having shown him that he was also loved. They have taught me about forgiveness of others and myself, of letting go, and of much more. And now, though it's not the book I started with, I do have that book. And their stories will finally be told, surprisingly for the first time ever. It has been a 7-year journey, and it has saved me many times. As my children have moved on, I've relocated, and as I looked once again for my purpose. And now I need to ask you to back up for a moment, because the circle is never really straight. Way back to 2001, before cancer came into our lives, before we became Unitarians, as we continued to build this life that I wasn't sure I was meant to be living. Back then, Kevin knew and understood. What I thought I had hidden from everyone, this facade I had created to cover the doubt, Kevin saw through. He just didn't tell me. Instead, he wrote me a letter that asked all the questions I had been too afraid to ask myself. Instead of giving me the letter, he placed it in a wooden box that sat on his dresser. The box was a catch-all for things he wanted to keep, foreign coins from his work travels, concert tickets, favorite photos. At the very bottom was a letter he had written but not completed. When he died 10 years later, I couldn't bring myself to go through that box. So instead, I placed it in a cardboard box with some other things, and I gave it to one of our UU friends who stored it in her basement until I got settled in a new life. Once I moved, I put the box on a high shelf, still not able to look inside. It wasn't until 2021, just 2 years ago, that I decided to go through the last of his things. And I found the box, and I inspected all of its contents, including the letter at the very bottom, written 20 years earlier. He first confessed that he had read my college journals, but that he wondered where that woman was, where she had gone, the one who left all of her emotions on the page, who wrote with such heart, who asked life's tough questions, who felt things so deeply. He knew I was missing that expression in my life, and he feared it was making me a bitter person. But he also worried and admitted his own insecurity. If I found myself in writing again, maybe I would leave him. And so he never gave me the letter, but instead he tucked it away, maybe never looking at it again. So in 2006, when I told him I needed to go back to school, of course he was supportive because he had known all along. Perhaps he was more secure in our marriage, or just maybe his ability to handle whatever might happen. But mostly, I think he wanted me to finally be happy. When I came across that letter in 2021, 11 years after his death, I was going through yet another time of self-doubt. It was COVID. My book project had been delayed. I was feeling a loneliness and isolation that I really had never felt before. Reading that letter was like a talisman, a lightning bolt, a message from him wherever he is to keep going, to finally realize that there are several purposes and I needed to live mine. As though he was standing in front of me, shaking his head, his hand on his hip, challenging me to make the most of this life, regardless of where I've been or what I've done, which paths I've taken, which I've left behind. I had walked with him in life. I had held his hand in death, and now I needed to be true to me. It felt like a lifetime of prayers finally being answered. Now I understand that we can have more than one purpose. We can take more than one path, whether that be around our faith and our belief or our contribution to the world. While I wondered if I should have been doing something else, I now know that I was meant to be exactly where I was, to see my husband and best friend through the worst of it, to hold his hand as he left this world, and to see our children through their time of loss and grief. And now that purpose is almost back where I started, to write those stories, not of the rock stars that I thought I should be chasing, but about the women who love them, the women who saw them through to their ends. I guess all along, I wasn't really ever meant to write about music. I was meant to write about love. Thank you.